The lecture hall on the Zorian academic vessel pulsed with the quiet hum of anticipation. Students from across the star systems sat upright, their translucent eyes wide with curiosity. They had traveled light years for this. The intergalactic exchange program, a rare, coveted chance to study the most enigmatic and baffling species in the galaxy. Humans. At the front, Professor Vixer, tall, imposing, his bioluminescent skin casting a pale glow, tapped the hollow pad on his lectern. Instantly, a floating list materialized in the air, scrolling through an inventory of chemical compounds. These, Vixer announced, his voice even and unwavering, are substances classified as toxic. Most cause severe biological distress. Some are lethal if ingested. Others degrade organic tissue over time. The students absorbed every word. Some flinched at certain names: arsenic, ethanol, capsaicin. Others jotted down notes at rapid speed, their oculars darting from the list to their slates. Your assignment, Vixer continued, is to observe humans in their natural environment and document how they interact with these substances. Uneasy murmurs rippled through the class. Some students exchanged glances full of skepticism and concern. The human species, after all, was notorious in academic circles for its reckless approach to biology. The idea that humans might willingly expose themselves to dangerous toxins seemed absurd, maybe even a myth. Still, the Zorian ethos demanded observation, not assumption. So a field trip was a ranged destination, a bustling human marketplace on Earth. The students, disguised in hollow shifts to appear less conspicuous, followed their guide into the crowded streets below. The market was an overwhelming experience. The air swirled with a medley of scents, some sweet, others sharp or strangely pungent. Vendors shouted over one another, advertising their wares. Everything felt chaotic, alien. Near a smoky food stall, Zal, a tall and inquisitive student, paused. Behind the counter, a human with wild hair and a battered jacket flipped sizzling objects on a metal slab. The aroma hit Zal's senses, sharp, almost acrid. Zal checked his datapad. The chemical detector confirmed it. Capsaicin, a well-known irritant, was being added generously to the food. The human looked up. "You want some?" he called, holding up a small red fruit. Its glossy skin glistened in the artificial lights. Zal hesitated, voice wavering. "What is that?" "Chili pepper," the human replied, grinning. "You eat it." Zal drew back. "This contains capsaicin. It is harmful." The man shrugged and, with a laugh, tossed a chili into his mouth. He bit down and chewed. Unfazed, though sweat soon shimmered on his forehead. "Oh yeah," he said, "it burns. But that's the fun part." Zal recoiled, stunned. "You are consuming a biological irritant for enjoyment?" "Pretty much." The man popped another chili into his mouth. Zal hurried back to his group, bewildered. "They are consuming known toxins for pleasure," he whispered. At another stall, Student 7 stopped to observe a human woman stirring a bubbling pot. The vapor was thick, nearly suffocating. 7's scanner read out the main ingredient: ethanol. "You're drinking this?" BII asked, horrified. The woman grinned, her eyes twinkling. "It's called mulled wine. Warms you up." She ladled a steaming portion into a cup and took a long sip. "This is a neurotoxin," VII protested, appendages stiffening. "It damages cognitive function." The woman just shrugged, sipping again. "Only if you have too much." The students exchanged wary looks. The list of human toxic substances wasn't shrinking because humans avoided them. It was shrinking because they seemed to consume them as part of daily life. A commotion drew their attention further down the market. A human pulled a dark, oblong object from a sack. Its odor was unmistakable, even from a distance. Professor Vixer's eyes widened. "Is that fermented fish?" "Strom," the human announced proudly, holding it aloft. Zor's datapad beeped with a warning. "Hydrogen sulfide detected, a well-known toxin." The human just laughed. "Yeah, it stinks. But if you get past the smell, it's not bad." One Zorian student nearly collapsed on the spot. "How are they alive?" they gasped. For the first time in his career, Professor Vixer had no answer. The field trip ended, but the sense of unease didn't fade. The humans' indifference to hazardous substances, sometimes even their enthusiasm, defied every principle the Zorians had ever studied. It wasn't just reckless. It was incomprehensible. Back aboard the vessel, the students gathered in the observation chamber. The display flickered with footage from a market. One still image of a human biting into a chili pepper, sweat on his brow, remained frozen on the main screen. Zhao pointed at the image. His biological response is clear. Perspiration increased respiration. And yet, he continued eating. Reel's appendages curled inward. They intentionally induced distress. What evolutionary advantage could that possibly serve? They seem to derive enjoyment, Zri answered. The one drinking ethanol called it warming. Professor Vixer remained silent, his luminescence dimming as he pondered. We must determine if this is unique or widespread. Direct experimentation is needed, but in a safe, controlled manner. So the Zorians arranged a diplomatic exchange, inviting a human delegation aboard their ship. To the students' surprise, the humans accepted eagerly. Several days later, 3 humans arrived. At first glance, they looked unremarkable by their species standards. Their leader, Captain Reyes, surveyed the chamber with an open, almost amused curiosity. Next to her was a man with a heavily scarred forearm, and another holding a steaming cup. The scanner identified its contents as caffeine, a stimulant. Professor Vixer addressed them directly. We have been studying human biological tolerances. Your species displays an unorthodox relationship with hazardous compounds. Reyes glanced at her team, a wry smile forming. Sound about right. VII hesitated. We wish to understand your limits. Would you be willing to demonstrate? The humans agreed, almost too enthusiastically. A controlled environment was prepared. The Zorians arranged a series of substances, each flagged as dangerous in their medical database, on a table before the humans. The trio sat calmly, awaiting the test, as if it were an ordinary afternoon. The first test, concentrated capsaicin, far more potent than anything from the market. The scarred man, Davis, dipped a neutral morsel into the blistering liquid and chewed. His face reddened, his breathing sped up, but he grinned. That's got a kick. Seven's appendages twitched. You are experiencing acute pain. Davis exhaled, grinning wider. Yeah, but it's a good burn. The Zorians shifted uneasily. The next test, ethanol in escalating concentrations. Reyes took a sip, nodded, and gestured for something stronger. This is pretty mild, she commented. A more potent sample was provided. Reyes sipped again, exhaled, and leaned back, content. VII checked the readings. Your cognitive function should be impaired. Reyes laughed. Give it time. The caffeine test followed. The man with the cup, Lieutenant Harris, simply lifted his mug when prompted. Already ahead of you, he said, taking another sip. The Zorians were baffled. Test after test, humans not only survived, they seemed entertained. Capsaicin doses reached levels that should have been unbearable. Davis just asked for water. Ethanol increased until even Reyes admitted she felt it, though her coordination was still mostly intact. Harris's caffeine intake was high enough to make the students nervous, but he only yawned and asked if they had something stronger. Privately, the Zorian students gathered in the observation alcove. They metabolize toxins with alarming efficiency, one whispered. They seek out the experience, another added. They willingly endure discomfort. Professor Vixer gestured toward the humans, who were chatting and laughing as if nothing unusual had occurred. We must understand why. The Zorians invited the humans to explain. Reyes leaned back, thoughtful. There's a few reasons. Some of it's cultural. Some of it's just fun. Fun. Zhao echoed the word, as if it was truly alien. Davis chuckled. Yeah, pushing limits. Seeing how far you can go. VII shook his head. But these substances cause harm. Harris shrugged. Only if you overdo it. Reyes nodded. It's about balance. We know there are risks, but we manage them. And honestly, sometimes a little discomfort makes life more interesting. The concept was completely foreign to the Zorians. Yet the evidence was undeniable. Professor Vixer finally spoke. Your species willingly engages with hazardous materials, endures discomfort, and considers it entertainment. Reyes smirked. Pretty much. The Zorians were left speechless. For all their scientific knowledge, they had no framework to explain what they had just witnessed. The students sat in silence, oculars darting between their professor and the relaxed, unfazed humans. There was no conclusion, only the knowledge that their understanding of organic survival had just been turned upside down. Professor Vixer gathered his thoughts, his bioluminescent patterns shifting in shades of blue as he tried to process the day's discoveries. The humans' attitude was even more unsettling than their biology. They should have been cautious, maybe even defensive, yet instead they leaned in, curious and relaxed, as if they were the ones running the experiment. Vixer finally broke the silence, gesturing toward the adjacent lab chamber. We must examine your biological responses in controlled conditions, particularly your recovery process. Davis, rubbing his stomach with a rueful grin, nodded. That's probably a good idea. That chili's already making its way through. The students collectively recoiled at the thought, but the lab was prepared swiftly and efficiently. The humans were placed in separate diagnostic pods, each one surrounded by sophisticated Zorian scanning equipment, ready to monitor everything from neural signals to metabolic breakdown. The process began immediately. Within minutes, Verilon adjusted his scanner and frowned at the readings. Their cardiovascular systems are highly variable. Inside his pod, Harris glanced up with mild curiosity. Is that a bad thing? Zal hesitated before responding. Your heart rate fluctuates significantly. For us, that would indicate distress. Harris just shrugged. Depends on what you were doing before the scan. The caffeine probably bumped mine up. The students looked at each other, puzzled. The human had consumed a stimulant so casually, and yet his body responded as if it were completely normal. From her pod, Reyes tapped on the glass. We adapt. If we stress our bodies, they compensate, exercise, diet, even environmental changes. Our systems adjust over time. Professor Vixer's glow dimmed thoughtfully. So repeated exposure to hazardous substances increases your tolerance. Davis, arms behind his head, grinned. More or less. Take alcohol. If you drink regularly, your body processes it differently than if you rarely drink. Verilon's appendages curled in confusion. You've deliberately exposed your cells to toxins to increase resistance. Reyes smiled. We call it building a tolerance. A hush fell over the chamber as the Zorians took this in. To them, intentional exposure to danger was illogical, yet to humans it was standard practice. The scans continued. The results became even more perplexing. Human digestive systems showed a resilience that defied all the logic in the Zorian medical books. Capsaicin, which should have caused severe distress, only triggered pain receptors temporarily before being broken down. Ethanol was metabolized at wildly different speeds. Reyes's system, for instance, cleared it much faster than the average baseline. Even caffeine, which should have caused major neural disruption, seemed to blend seamlessly into Harris's physiology. Hours passed, and the humans remained remarkably unfazed. Occasionally, one would stretch or yawn, but their vital signs stayed stable. If anything, the only sign of discomfort came from Davis, who pressed a hand to his stomach but otherwise remained calm. Professor Vixer eventually addressed the biggest mystery. Your body sustained damage, yet you do not seem concerned. Reyes looked over at Davis, whose scarred arm rested against the pod wall. We heal, she said. Vixer's eyes widened. Explain. Davis lifted his arm for everyone to see. This got burned pretty bad a few years back. Skin grew back. Not perfect, but it works. Zal's appendages tensed. Your body regenerates? Davis shook his head. Not instantly, but yeah. Cuts close, bones knit, burns heal over time. Seven's oculars flashed, impressed. Your survival rate must be astonishing. Reyes exhaled. Depends. We take a lot of risks. Sometimes they don't pan out. But yes, we're tough. Vixer regarded them for a long moment, clearly impressed. You willingly endure hazards, adapt to them, and recover from injury with remarkable efficiency. Harris grinned. Pretty much. The Zorians had planned for a controlled, slow study. Instead, they'd witnessed something no textbook could have predicted. Not just resilience, but an almost cheerful willingness to subject themselves to discomfort. But no one anticipated what would happen when that resilience was tested beyond casual consumption. 6 hours after the initial tests, Davis, who had consumed the highest capsaicin dose, shifted uncomfortably in his pod. He tapped his fingers against the armrest, breathing steadily but more deeply than before. Vixer leaned in, concerned. "Are you experiencing distress?" Davis exhaled through his nose. "Nothing I can't handle. Stomach's just letting me know it's not happy." Zri adjusted the scanner. "Your internal temperature has risen. There's evidence of increased acid production." Davis let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, that's about right. Spicy food does that." Seven's appendages twitched. "You knew this would happen?" "Of course," Davis replied. "Doesn't stop anyone." The student's oculars flickered with disbelief. The human had knowingly ingested something that was now actively disrupting his body chemistry, and he treated it as nothing more than an inconvenience. The next anomaly appeared with Reyes. The ethanol had already moved through her system, but the scanners picked up something the Zorians hadn't expected. Her liver was processing the compound at an accelerated rate, breaking it down with remarkable efficiency. Vixer pointed at the readout. "Your metabolic function is compensating for the toxin. Your body is actively neutralizing it." Reyes nodded. "Yeah, that's what livers do. Filter out what shouldn't be there." VII examined the data, but the process is not uniform. Reyes stretched. "It varies from person to person. Some people can handle more than others." Zal's appendages tightened. "Your species has an internal filtration system that adjusts dynamically?" "More or less," Reyes agreed. "It's not perfect, but it gets the job done." Vixer was silent for a long moment, absorbing the implications. Humans had a built-in detox system, one that could adapt to exposure over time. No wonder they could ingest hazardous substances with such regularity. Then Harris gave them the final surprise. He had been sipping caffeine for hours, yet showed no signs of distress. In fact, he looked more comfortable than when the experiment began. Zri adjusted the scanner. "You should be experiencing irregularities in neural activity." Harris grinned. "Like what? Overstimulation? Cardiac strain?" "Nah, this is normal for me. If anything, I'd be worse without it." Seven's appendages curled. "You require the stimulant to function?" Harris nodded. "Some people do. Not full dependency, but it helps." The students recoiled slightly. This wasn't just tolerance, it was integration. The humans didn't simply endure toxins. Their bodies adapted and sometimes even relied on them. Then suddenly Davis groaned. Everyone turned as he pressed his hand to his stomach, jaw tight. Vixer stepped forward, concerned. "Your condition is deteriorating." Davis shook his head. "I just need to walk it off." "Walk it off?" Zal echoed, astonished. "You are experiencing gastrointestinal distress." Davis shrugged, standing up. "It'll pass. Worst case, I suffer for a bit. It's not a big deal." Seven's oculars widened. "You are knowingly enduring internal damage." Davis managed a weak grin. "I've had worse." The room went silent. The humans had demonstrated resilience, but this went further. They accepted suffering as an ordinary part of life. Vixer turned to Reyes. "How often does your species experience self-inflicted distress?" Reyes sighed. "More often than we should. But it's manageable." Zal's appendages twitched. "By what standard?" Reyes smiled. "By ours." Vixer had spent his entire career studying anomalies across the galaxy, but nothing had prepared him for humans. Their bodies defied logic. Their choices made no sense, and their tolerance for suffering was simply beyond comprehension. The data collected was overwhelming. Scan after scan confirmed the same baffling truth. Humans didn't just survive in the presence of hazards. They almost seemed to seek them out. For all the scientific clarity, none of the data explained the underlying question that haunted every Zorian in the room. Why? Davis sat back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest. Whatever discomfort he'd felt earlier from the chili now seemed to have faded into the background, barely worth a mention. Reyes, for her part, looked almost amused by the entire ordeal. Harris tapped his fingers on his now empty cup, waiting patiently for whatever experiment or question would come next. The humans had been subjected to an array of toxins. Their bodies had responded, adapted, and now, somehow, they sat relaxed as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. At last, Professor Vixer set aside his usual analytical approach. He faced the humans, voice soft but sincere. You have demonstrated astonishing adaptability. But that doesn't explain your willingness to endure pain that should, by any logic, be avoidable. Is there no instinct for self-preservation? Reyes cocked her head, considering the question. Of course we have self-preservation. We just don't let it run our lives. Zal's oculars flickered. That is contradictory. Davis chuckled. Not really. We avoid stuff that'll kill us instantly, sure. But discomfort? That's just part of living. VII looked from one human to the next, still struggling to comprehend. You intentionally consume hazardous substances. You allow your bodies to endure distress, sometimes for recreation. You recover from injuries that would incapacitate most species, and now you claim that suffering is normal. Harris set his cup down. Pain's a signal. It tells us something's wrong. But pain itself isn't always the problem. Sometimes it's just part of the process. Zal's appendages twitched. Elaborate. Reyes gestured toward Davis. He ate the chili, right? It hurt, his body protested, but he knew it wasn't actual danger. He endured it because the experience itself was enjoyable. Davis grinned, and because I wanted to see how much I could take. Varen recoiled slightly. You seek your own limits? Harris nodded. All the time. It's how we improve. Vixer's bioluminescence pulsed faintly. You are suggesting that voluntary exposure to hardship makes you stronger. Reyes shrugged. In a way, yeah. It builds tolerance. Teaches us what we can handle. Vixer turned to Zal and Raylan. We assumed their biology was the anomaly. It's their mentality. A quiet realization settled in the room. The students absorbed this, recognizing that human survival wasn't just about the body but the mind. Reyes leaned forward. Ever hear of vaccinations? Vixer hesitated, curious. Explain. We introduce small amounts of harmful agents into our bodies, Reyes explained. Not enough to kill us, just enough to train our immune systems. That way, when the real threat comes, we're ready. Seven's appendages curled in disbelief. You make yourselves sick to prevent worse sickness. Harris nodded. Exactly. Zri fell silent for a long moment. You do not simply endure suffering. You weaponize it. Davis laughed, clapping his hands together. Now you're getting it. Vixer exhaled, a sense of wonder and respect coloring his tone. Your species is not reckless. You are prepared. Reyes smiled. We like to be ready for anything. Varen shook his head slowly. And yet, despite your resilience, you still experience biological consequences. Davis patted his stomach with a lopsided grin. Oh, I'll regret that chili later for sure. But it's worth it. Zri hesitated. You accept suffering for the sake of experience. Reyes nodded. It's part of growth. We test ourselves, push our boundaries, get knocked down, but we get back up stronger. Vixer looked at them, his gaze lingering with newfound understanding. This is why your species survives. Reyes' smile was quiet but triumphant. Exactly. And with that, the Zorians had no further questions. The humans, with all their contradictions and oddities, had revealed something even more extraordinary than their physiology. A philosophy of endurance, curiosity, and adaptation that, in its own strange way, was as powerful as any biological trait. The lecture hall, once buzzing with confusion and concern, was now filled with a kind of awe. The students, professors, and even the ship itself seemed to quietly marvel at the lesson humanity had brought across the stars.